In any case, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the first keynote speaker, Ezra Chitando of the University of Zimbabwe. Just a brief word of introduction for a person that hardly needs being introduced. Ezra Chitando is professor in the Department of Religious Studies at University of Zimbabwe. His areas of specialization, his focus areas are the history of religion and the phenomenology of religion. He has worked a lot on gender and HIV and on methods and theories of the study of religion. He is also a recipient of the Georg Forster Research Award by the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation in 2016. And of course, he has a hugely long list of publications in a wide area of subjects. And one of these areas is religion and development. He is one of the most renowned experts on religion and development. And I just want to highlight one of the publications authored by, or edited at least by, Ezra Chitando. It is a book, Religion and Development in Africa, edited by Ezra Chitando and others. And it really is an exciting volume that provides an important African perspective to this global debate of religion and development. It's really an exciting volume. It's available in open access as well. So can be downloaded freely on the internet. Dr. Chitando, it's really wonderful to have you here, and we greatly look very much forward to your presentation. And I would say, well, I learned this morning, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Philip, for giving me the screen. Good afternoon, friends. Good afternoon, colleagues. If you allow me, I will be on video, but because I'm not sure of the consistency of my connectivity, perhaps I will switch it off, but it depends on how it will work out. So, friends, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers very much for the invitation. It is my singular honor and privilege to participate in this conference. I would also want to pay tribute to the students, the scholars in the making, for the sacrifice and the commitment. We deeply appreciate that. And I would also want to acknowledge my co-presenter and all of us who have made time to be in this conference. So my presentation this afternoon is entitled Strides and Struggles, Religion and Development in Africa. I have good news for us in that I will not take more than probably 20 minutes. I will only go to the specific aspects of my presentation that I think can generate debate. So the conference is entitled Religious Communities and Sustainable Development, Points of Departure for a Post-2030 Development Agenda. A very timely reflection there. So allow me to begin with the introduction. As you will see from colleagues who have joined us on this call, the relationship between religion and development is attracting attention of scholars from diverse disciplines, and these disciplines include anthropology, religious studies, gender, security, economics, and other disciplines. So where previously development practitioners were very suspect or suspicious of religion, we now see increased interest and attention to religion. So there's greater interest in religion. So for example, one of the prime movers in this discourse, Catherine Marshall, in 2001 writes, and I quote from her article, Development and Religion, a Different Lens on Development Debates. I quote very briefly. open quote, the world of religion has been unacknowledged and often unseen force for many development practitioners in the past. Many reasons, good and bad, explain this divorce. Long traditions of separation of state and religion are deeply ingrained and deliberately place a remove between development and faith issues. End of quote. Colleagues, if Marshall could refer to, and I put it in quotation marks, a divorce between religion and development, it is now possible to refer to a remarriage. Indeed, there's a sense in which religion and development have gone into a honeymoon phase, where after a rocky divorce, we are now into a blissful honeymoon period. So there's generally a very good period for religion and development. Whereas about a decade ago, there were only a few limited publications in this field. The recent overviews by colleagues who are participating in this conference are quite telling. So for example, Ignatius Swart in 2016, Emma Tomalin in 2018, our colleague Barbara Popani in 2019, and then Philip, thank you for marketing our book, Chitando et al. 2020. As all these scholars have shown, there's a growing interest in religion and development globally, making it, I think, one of the fastest developing fields or subfields within the academic study of religion, more broadly conceptualized. Colleagues, why religion and development? Why this remarriage? Why this rekindling of love between religion and development? Allow me to draw our attention to a few major issues that I think are responsible for this increased interest in religion and development. First, the failure of the secularization thesis within the sociology of religion in general, or academia more specifically. That's one. So the secularization thesis, that the assumption that as science and technology would develop, religion would recede. As it failed, the interest in religion and development gained momentum. Secondly, the global resurgence of religion in politics and society related to the failure of the secularization thesis. Thirdly, again, the phenomenal interest and increase in the discourse on religion and global security and the implications thereof in terms of development. Fourth, I'm reading in the contribution of faith-based development, faith-based organizations rather, to community transformation, particularly in the global south. As states have struggled to deliver the goods of development and faith-based organizations have stepped in, there's been a growing appreciation, particularly as I speak from some of the work I do with the World Council of Churches, growing interest in the contribution of faith-based organizations to development. Fifth, and quickly, more recently, the global discourse on development, initially through the Millennium Development Goals 2000 to 2015, and the Sustainable Development Goals 2015 to 2030. Then sixth and finally, our struggle for survival as scholars of religion. The critique that we practitioners of religious studies are engaged in an exercise that does not have existential value has forced many of us as scholars to seek relevance by saying, wait a moment, we are very important, we are studying development. So those 6 factors suggest to me why religion and development is gaining momentum. Allow me then to move on to the central argument of my presentation. Whereas colleagues within the sector have generally approached religion development, answering the question, does religion promote development or does it not promote development? My central thesis this afternoon, colleagues, is to say this has been a wrong question to ask, or at least this has not been the most productive route to take. In other words, my argument is that it's not an either or, but a both and. So for example, Heriteha 2006 has a book entitled Bridge or Barrier. Jeffrey Haynes 2007 has a book with the subtitle Conflict or Cooperation. My compatriot Kenneth Mtata has a book entitled Religion, Help or Hindrance. So the dominant scholarly discourse has been that religion is one or the other. Either religion promotes development or religion frustrates and blocks development. I'm proposing this afternoon that perhaps it is more effective for us to approach this almost going back to the thesis on the ambivalence of the sacred, to say that the same religion, which in one instance promotes development, can in the next instance frustrate development. So I'm proposing a both-end approach. So if we are going to take anything away from my presentation this afternoon, it is that I am arguing that there have been both strides. And when I looked up the word strides in the dictionary, it says to walk along, to take decisive steps in a specific direction. So those are strides, very positive. And there are struggles, which means to experience difficulty or make a great effort in order to do something. So those are the two conceptual maps that I'm going to apply. Allow me to skip very deliberately my section on defining religion and development and move more specifically to the strides in religion and development in Africa. I seek to draw our attention to 4 areas where religion has contributed and has made strides to development in Africa. The first one is the general area of health, where, for example, from the missionary period, I see in our program that we will have a presentation on mission history. And a review of missionary trajectories in Africa will show that particularly the mainline churches have invested in health and healing in Africa. So faith-based organizations have done a lot of work investing in healthcare, and African indigenous religions have also invested in indigenous knowledge systems. So my argument here is that religion is contributing towards the attainment of sustainable development goal number 3, which speaks of ensuring health for all at all ages. So religion has made a very decisive stride in terms of health. And we see this replicated, of course, in the context of COVID-19. It is not possible for one to do justice to the discourse on COVID-19 in Africa without taking on board the diverse religious perspectives. So second, religion has also contributed immensely to education. So first health, secondly, education. And this education is both Islamic and Christian, where followers of the different religions have been equipped, millions actually, to address contemporary challenges through religious education or education at least facilitated by religion. And so Sustainable Development Goal number 4 speaks of ensuring inclusive and equitable education and ensure lifelong learning opportunities for all. So health, education, and then third, And I know this would perhaps generate further contention, but I argue that religion has provided many Africans with a firm sense of identity and a sense of belonging. My friends, my argument is that we cannot exhaust discourse on development by looking at just figures in financial terms, but the social capital that religion bequeaths to its practitioners and followers is quite significant. And so that way, the sense of belonging has generated and contributed to sustainable development goal number 16, which speaks of promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. The narrative has tended to focus on the division and violence that religion brings. But I think those are more of exceptions rather than norms. The norm in terms of religion in Africa has been to facilitate community integration. Fourth and finally, in terms of the strides, I would argue that religion has been involved in the response to sustainable development number 1, which is to eradicate or end poverty in all its forms everywhere. And so if one consults, for example, the book edited by Peter Paris, Religion and Poverty, you realize that Muslim and Christian faith-based organizations in particular have been involved in the struggle against poverty in Africa. So space considerations and time considerations also mean that I cannot invest in religion and climate action, religion and gender equality, that is sustainable development goal number 5, and others. What I need then to underscore, even as I move towards concluding my presentation, is to say that religion has made very serious strides in contributing to development. What have been the struggles? Despite the glossy picture that I have painted, I need to have honesty and admit that religion has also faced serious challenges in its interaction with development in Africa. First, the emergence of what we within the African scholarship have called misleading theologies, such as the theologies that justify violence, theologies that propagate. I'm trying to be careful with terminology here. So some idea of prosperity, which is quite tenuous, when religion struggles with biomedicine, when religion peddles and popularizes conspiracy theories, then that's my first critique, that in those forms and in those modes of expression, religion becomes a threat to development. There is a struggle there. Secondly, religion has struggled with the doctrine or idea of human rights, particularly accepting women's full rights to autonomy and dignity. This has been an ongoing struggle where the simple truth that women are full human beings is a struggle for religion in all its forms, not just in Africa, but globally, to accept the full humanity, autonomy, and integrity of women. Third and finally, religion needs to do more to challenge the inequality that it is associated with. So in various local contexts, belonging to one religion means that one is already marginalized and excluded. So if you are a Muslim in a particular context, by dint of being a Muslim, you are marginalized. The same being a member of the Rastafari community, the same being a member of African indigenous religions. And so religion struggles with inequality. Allow me then to conclude my presentation by arguing that, or reiterating actually, that there are both strides and struggles in Africa's religious engagement with sustainable development goals, and that this is most likely going to continue beyond the agenda of 2030 or even Africa's agenda 2063. What remains clear, however, is that religion cannot be wished away, both in Africa and in any other part of the world. As has become clear in the response to COVID-19, the question is not whether or not religion is helpful, but we must strive to amplify the positive role of religion while addressing its negative dimension. Colleagues, I am arguing that as scholars of religion, particularly in Africa, we cannot hide behind the ideology of neutrality. We should intensify our efforts to promote the strides and minimize the struggles. Therefore, finally, we must invest in, number one, reflections on emerging and critical areas such as religion and mental health. Because in the post-COVID-19 dispensation, the theme of mental health is coming to the fore. So we need to generate a research agenda that addresses that. Secondly, we must invest in exploring the interface between religion and development with specific reference to adolescents and young people. In Africa, but also globally. We have a generation of adolescents and youth who feel marginalized by what we are calling development, who feel marginalized, forgotten, and overlooked in our discourses on advancement. So we need to do more. Finally, we need to focus on pressing developmental challenges relating to climate change, inequality, and the role of religion. I thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to further deliberations and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ezra, for this exciting, rich, and highly insightful presentation. Really exciting to hear you talk and to hear your perspective. And I would like to open up the screen, I guess, for discussion now. Please raise your hand using the raise hand function in the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. I would kindly ask everybody to keep their questions and comments short. And I suggest, Ezra, if it's okay with you, to collect 2 or 3 questions, and then you have a chance to respond.
That is in order. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yes, I see Elias and then Ja. Elias.
Thank you so much, Prof. Chitando, for your presentation, especially in regards to strides and struggle. But I had a quick question in regards to Pentecostalism and development in Africa, the discourses they offer, especially you've pointed out the mission trajectory of mainline churches in terms of education and health. And again, in your argument, it's like religion offers development from below argument. Now, in regards to Pentecostalism, I would like to hear, especially the idea that Pentecostalism perhaps offers personal sense of salvation that is not devoid of social transformation. Like, for example, they may have schools, they may have health facilities, but they're not necessarily for the common good. What do you say, Prof? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll collect the question. Ja, you are the next one.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was very full of perspective. And now I have a question about when you talk about the religion for development also facing some challenge, and you mentioned the first challenge would be misleading the terminology, and I was not very clear about this point. Can you explain it a little bit more and give us a more like a specific example? How could it be sweetened to development? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ja. And I think a third question is in order. We have Rafael Sartorius. Rafael.
Hello, Professor Chitando. Thank you very much for your presentation. I was looking forward for some time to hear you speaking. And my question would be, what is development to your understanding? You gave some hints, but what is the development? What is that we were talking about? Because it's a very broad discourse. Thank you very much.
I think this is good for a first round. So, Ezra, you have the screen to respond to the first three questions.
Thank you very much, Philip, and thank you, colleagues. I'll start with the question that Elias shared on Pentecostalism. Very relevant because Pentecostalism is without doubt the fastest growing brand of religion on the African, particularly sub-Saharan African religious scene. My reaction would be, I would apply the same paradigm to Pentecostalism. There are strides and struggles in Pentecostalism's contribution to development. So that our task as researchers, I think, is to do justice to the multiplicity and complexity of the phenomenon of Pentecostalism, so that perhaps on a scale of 1 to 10, one can then say 6 out of 10 is Pentecostalism's contribution to development, or 3 out of 10, depending on the viciousness or generosity of the scholar making the evaluation. Because we must also be honest as academics, there's no neutral ground when it comes to evaluating a religious tradition's contribution to development. So for example, within African scholarship, 2 scholars have come out on 2 different standpoints regarding the contribution of Pentecostalism. My compatriot, Lovemoto Garasei, contends that Pentecostalism has contributed significantly to the theology or idea of self-improvement in terms of pursuing one's agenda, and he regards Pentecostalism, that's in his 2011 article, as a positive social force. On the other hand, my good friend Asonze Kennedy Uka is brutal and scathing in his assessment of Pentecostalism. But where Chitando would stand or sit is somewhere in between, to then say this approach perhaps of an either or is highly problematic. There are aspects of Pentecostalism that are definitely positive. When Pentecostals, for example, build Pentecostal universities, and young people and older people come through those universities equipped and empowered, when Pentecostalism has a positive approach towards biomedicine, when Pentecostal pastors go to the front line and say, COVID-19 is real, please observe all the COVID-19 protocols, you cannot say that Pentecostalism is against development. On the other hand, we do have Pentecostal pastors who have generated problematic theologies. So I'm more persuaded to go for a middle-of-the-road approach, which appreciates strides and struggles. My friend Ja, my apologies. I wasn't able, I think there's something that happened with my connectivity, and so I could not get the question as you posed it. Philip, I don't know if you would be able to rephrase.
Yes, the question that Ja posed was about the issue of misleading theologies.
All right.
Whether
yes,
you could
yes.
elaborate on this a little bit more.
Yes. My apologies. Misleading theologies. These are theologies or worldviews that are not peculiar to one religion, but these are worldviews that are problematic. They become misleading. And I know as a scholar of religion that I am going into very tenuous ground here, but I will still say it. These are theologies that are death dealing. These are theologies that do not promote a realistic approach to life. These are theologies or worldviews that promote violence, for example, extremist ideologies, both found in different religions, including forms of Islamic extremism, forms of Christian fundamentalism. How do we know that this theology is a misleading theology? We know that this theology is a misleading theology when it is not life promoting, when it denies citizens and believers and practitioners the capacity to work with their own hands, the capacity to enjoy what in Christian theology would be called abundant life. When it's a theology of imprisonment and fear, then for me, it becomes a misleading theology. And I think that was my first critique, that there we have struggles with religion. I hope, Ja, that explains my reading and interpretation of misleading theologies. Raphael wants us to spend the whole day here when he asks, what is development? I would have turned it around to the conference organizers and say, what is their understanding of development? The development is a multifaceted concept, which when I started presenting, I tactfully, but perhaps naively, sought to navigate by taking a Buddhist response, because Buddhism says every wrongly posed question must be answered with total silence. And so the temptation to sidestep the question, what is development, is real. However, allow me to go to the section where I tried to define development. I said that for me, development is a process through which individuals, communities, and nations move to a more preferable state, enabling them to utilize their full capabilities and attaining high levels of satisfaction. You can see that I have sought to bring in multiple dimensions there. First, that it is a process and not a destination, because and Raphael, that's a very important question you have asked, and I had sought to sidestep. What we have seen with COVID-19 is that there is no community, nation, or group that is quote unquote fully developed. Take the example of the Western healthcare delivery system, which up to COVID-19, and we are still in the era of COVID-19, which is why we are not meeting physically, but meeting virtually. So prior to COVID-19, the globe was generally satisfied that to all intents and purposes, the global North health delivery systems were quote unquote developed. Come COVID-19, and suddenly the limitations of that system were laid bare for all to see. So my argument is that development is not a destination, but development is an ongoing process through which communities, individuals, and nations perpetually, because if we think that development is a destination, then we are suffering from intellectual poverty and the refusal to imagine. So for me, development is ongoing, and so global South countries and nations and continents are developing. Global North countries and communities and individuals are developing. You can see there my doffing to Amartya Sen's capabilities approach, because development must also allow individuals and communities the opportunity to use their capabilities in order for them to better themselves and the environment. But I will use one trick that I learned from my previous supervisor. He says, if you're in a conference and there's a difficult question which comes, you can always promise that I am covering that in my next book. Thank you.
Well, we are certainly looking forward to that book. I have a few more people on the list. The first is Emma Bridger. Emma.
Thank you so much, Philip, and thank you for your talk, Professor Chitando. You mentioned that adolescents and youth feel marginalized by what's being termed development. I just wondered if you could maybe say a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Emma. The next person on my list is Patricia.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful presentation, Professor Chitando. I just have one question, that in terms of global interpretation of development and sustainability, from an African ecological perspective, where do we find ourselves with the two marginalized groups in society? I will leave the youth for now, and I'm looking at the African indigenous knowledge systems that are discarded, as well as the African indigenous churches. They are not part of any of these conversations in terms of the global discourse. How do we handle that, Prof?
Thank you. And then I have Deidre on my list.
Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you, Prof, for insightful presentation. I just want to bring drawn to the two important key things here that you mentioned: the religion, the ambiguity of religion, and development, the problematic notion of development. Both of it, of course, bringing religion and development within the sphere of as a discipline. We need to grapple with what religion means, and we need to grapple what development means. For me, development, to use sustainable development as a concept is highly problematic, due to the fact that development's connotation from missionary colonialism and so forth, and where we are at today. You've mentioned that neutrality needs to be challenged, right? And I completely understand that we need to use the word religion because we have an all-inclusive global ethos in terms of social justice, community development, and so forth. Ecological issues that we need to address need to be done from a perspective of global ethos. But to challenge neutrality, we also need to, bring religion within our own spheres, in our own points of departures, and leave religion and development as a discipline, and then focus from where we are at and going forward. Because with religion, with the intense focus of bringing religion within the development sphere, it does have psychological impact and understanding within how do we move forward from here, and it can mean stagnation. What I wanted to ask is, sorry, I'm getting carried away here. The second one is the development issue, and how do we deal with the concept, of development? We need to do something about the word. How do we take this approach? And I was just saying to communities, to congregations and church communities and other communities, you need to focus on sustainable development now and leave them on their own to do so. How do we grapple with the development concept and make it palatable for the people to understand what development means for them now, as opposed to what it has meant to them thus far? Thank you.
Thank you, Deidre. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Emma. Ezra, You have the opportunity to answer. And I would like to encourage everybody else who still wants to come in to raise their hand, because the next round, I think, might likely be the last round of questions.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for the questions. I will start from the last one, Deidre. A very powerful ideological critique on the terms that we take for granted. Whose development? And so I want to agree with you completely, particularly if we take into account the emerging decolonial discourse, which questions the whole issue of development. And indeed, proposals have been made to say, let's drop the concept religion, let's drop the concept development, let's generate new ideas and new concepts. And I'm quite open with that option, but it's guaranteed, friends, that whichever alternative we are going to come up with, and that I can bet my last dollar on, will be as problematic as the ones we have. So I like your suggestion. Perhaps what we need to do is to make the best out of the concepts that have been bequeathed to us. Words, ideas, concepts are never innocent. They come within a particular trajectory. They are laden with ideological, political, and even underlying theological overtones and undertones. Our task, I think, particularly within the Global South Scholarship, is to interrogate these concepts, and I agree with your perspective. Start where we are at, and how do we move forward? So it was both a question, a comment, and a proposal. So I would like to identify with you there. Patricia asks an equally important question from an African ecological perspective, particularly the marginalization of indigenous knowledge systems. For example, the marginalization of African indigenous churches. And indeed, I also notice and must concede that my presentation has been more focused on particularly the mainline churches, and perhaps the World Council of Churches here has clouded my perspective. But we do have members of the African indigenous churches within the World Council of Churches. I must concede that no strand of religion has a monopoly on contributing to development. One of our colleagues, Fortune Sibanda, has done fantastic work examining Rastafari contributions to ecological preservation in different parts of Africa. The book that Philip was referring to has chapters that look at the Hindu contribution and the Buddhist contributions to development in Africa. So my argument would be that we need to have a holistic and inclusive approach to religion and development in Africa, and accept that the colonial and colonizing scholarship has tended to focus more deliberately on the bigger story of the more established religions and systems at the expense of the marginalized. So we must undertake an exercise in the hermeneutic of retrieval, retrieve the stories and narratives of those who are on the underside of history, amplify those voices so that they have a place at the table. And I think this agenda is best carried forward by one, the practitioners of the religions themselves, and two, the African scholars who are associated with these religions. The first question by Emma, again, my apologies. Philip, you need to assist me here. I did not get the first question by Emma.
Yes, the question was whether you could elaborate on the challenge of including youth, as you mentioned it. And I would like to complement it with a question posed by Ignatius Swart in the chat, who says, Prof. Chitando, thank you for an excellent paper. I cannot agree more with the 3 challenges that you have mentioned right at the end. I'm particularly interested in your identification of young people as one of the challenges, as I am in the process of concluding a very long project on marginalized youth. Could you say a bit more about the youth challenge? What kind of research should we do in religion and development to address this challenge? So I think both questions refer to the topic of youth that you mentioned.
Yes, thank you. And I can see my colleague Kwabena is on this call, especially with his work on Pentecostalism. What is Pentecostalism in Africa in particular? It is the religion of young people. It is the religion of the youth. And what is Africa? If the African Union in its Agenda 2063 is anticipating a prosperous Africa, it will be an Africa dominated by young people, because young people, adolescents and young people are the majority in Africa. Africans aged 50 and above are now in, I hope I'm not being brutal, a miserable minority. So young people constitute the bulk of the citizenry of Africa. If we are going to do research on religion and development in Africa, we must by necessity focus on what this means for young people. Where are the voices of the young people? What do young people see as the key issues of the day for them, and not for those of us who are now parents and middle-aged? It must be young people who become the focus of our research agenda in Africa, in particular, adolescent girls and young women, who are often not even at the table when we begin to undertake discourses and discussions on religion and development. So both to Emma and to Ignatius, I would say that going forward, we must invest. Friends, for example, the issue I brought up on mental health post-COVID-19, it will be vital to understand, appreciate, and accompany young people, not just in Africa, but globally, as they seek to be relevant to a world that really does not want to prioritize the needs, aspirations, and interests of young people. I might begin preaching, so let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ezra. And we have 4 more questions. I think we'll take them 2 and 2. We have Sublime first.
Thank you, Philip, for the opportunity. Also, thank you, Professor Ezra, for your brilliant presentation. My question relates to misleading theology, but particularly relate to the vaccine against COVID. So many African governments are struggling to convince a religious community to take the vaccine. But some religious leaders have already sprayed the anti-campaign against the vaccine. Some say it is a conspiracy theory to reduce the African youth, and some mention the seal of the beast 6666. So if you were to mediate between African governments and religious communities, what would you say, and where will you start? And what would be your response to it?
Thank you. And the second question, Catherine Ganira.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Ezra, for this wonderful presentation. My question is short. I just want to know what the Pentecostals have done in the area of environmental development and sustainability in Africa? Because you've mentioned health, education, and others, but what about environmental development? What have they done?
Ezra, brief responses from the speaker's side.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Sublime. Misleading theology, and you have given me an onerous responsibility of mediating between religious leaders and governments in Africa. We could take a lot of time here, but let me say that, you see, we are dealing with trauma here. We're dealing with a community, and I'm speaking of Africa very broadly, which has experienced high levels of trauma: the slave trade, colonialism, neo-colonialism, and the rapacious theft of African resources. So the suspicion is not without justification in terms of the history of trauma as Africans have experienced it. So I sit back and say, on the first level, there is need for us to appreciate the mindset and the suspicion that, look, when the global North powers come into Africa and take mineral resources and without due compensation, Africans have every reason to suspect that there's a sinister agenda. So on that, so the starting point for me is to appreciate where people are coming from. However, we must also be charitable and understand that vaccines work. It's the same struggle that we have faced in terms of the HIV vaccines. Some of us have spent a lot of time pushing the agenda for vaccines to be available for people living with HIV. Suddenly the vaccines are available. You now have people who say, in the name of Jesus, throw away the vaccines and be healed miraculously. For me, that becomes a misleading theology. The positive theology is to say, take your medication, we'll still pray for you. That is a positive, life-giving theology. So, and Kwape now was very helpful in articulating forms of misleading theologies. There's a book published by the All Africa Conference of Churches on misleading theologies in Africa, and I recommend it to all of us. So to that end, how would I try and achieve rapprochement between religious leaders who are suspicious and political leaders who want to push vaccines? Let there be an honest meeting where the fears and concerns of the religious leaders and citizens are addressed, and also the government also showing why vaccines work and are important. Catherine raises an important question on Pentecostalism and environmental sustainability, and how have the Pentecostals contributed to that. One of the key strategies of Pentecostalism has been what the late doyen of African Pentecostalism, the Nigerian church historian Ukekalu says, is Pentecostalism's celebration of nature and the created order, particularly the securing of mountain tops, valleys, and other spaces and sacred spaces. That has gone a very long way in terms of promoting environmental sustainability. And in some instances, this has coincided with traditional shrines and sacred spaces. So to that end, the theology of continuity and contestation of sacred space by Pentecostals has contributed to an appreciation of the dynamism of the created order. I will pause there and leave room if we have another question. Thank you.
Yes, and we are slowly approaching the end of the first keynote in this session, but I will allow those that were on the list when I closed the list to still ask their questions, which leaves out Caroline. I'm sorry about that, but which gives Jones and then Kwabena the opportunity to make a statement or question. Jones, please.
Yeah, thanks very much for giving me this opportunity to engage Professor Chitando for this wonderful presentation that has been made here. I hope you are getting me.
Yes, loud and clear. Yes,
hello?
We can hear you. You can continue.
Okay, thanks very much. I think my contribution, to this presentation is that the sidelining of religion in general in the development discourse, and in particular, the sidelining of African traditional religions. These two issues are not helping us as practitioners of religion in Africa. Africa, by and large, is a religious continent per se. If we are talking of Christianity, then we can safely say that Africa is one of the most Christianized continents in the world. However, the development discourse, particularly the Western approaches, they are sidelining religion altogether. And they are bringing their conceptions of religion, which at times are at variance with the rich heritage of religion which we have in Africa. But my focus mainly is on African traditional religion. What I see is that this discourse on development and religion also sidelines African traditional religions. But these African traditional religions provides a foundation even for the missionary religions like Islam and Christianity, which came later and found the African traditional religion already in operation in Africa. Therefore, I think what I would like to say is that when we are probing and interrogating further this relationship of development and religion, we should not exclude the flourishing and the contributions that African traditional religions can make, particularly in the areas of health, areas of environment, because of the holistic worldview that
Jones, thank you for this important statement. Apologies for cutting you slightly short. Thank you for your important remark about African traditional religion. In the interest of time, I think Prof. Chitando will be able to respond to your concern, and you're most welcome to also re-engage afterwards directly. But in the interest of time, I would hand over the word to Kwabena Asamoah-Gyedu now. Thank you, Jones. Thank you very much for your statement. Kwabena. Kwabena, if you're speaking, we cannot hear you yet. Now we can see you. Wonderful.
Okay.
Now we can hear you. Yes.
You can hear me. Okay. Well, good afternoon from Ghana, and thank you, Ezra. I'll be quick because I see the internet is not very stable. Now, I have heard a lot of accusations against particularly Pentecostal charismatic Christians for not engaging in development and so on. I've heard this in various places, and usually my response is we tend to compare mission churches, the activity of mission churches that are 200 years and more, with churches that sometimes are barely 40 or 30 years old. And I think there's a bit of unfairness in the comparison, because churches will need to establish, institutionalize, put up structures, develop intellectual capacity before they can engage with development a certain way. You know, so beyond human development, as seen through motivational messages and so on, I think we ask for a bit much when we we query, especially contemporary Pentecostals, for not having a systematized development agenda. I'm not sure whether Ezra has a response to that. That's all my question.
Thank you very much, Corbina. Ezra, you have the last word, and I would ask you to be relatively concise in your last word so we can move to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Philip. One of the lessons I've learned is that next time I give a keynote, I should leave very little time for discussion. Yeah. But thank you. Two quick ones. Corbina, thank you. I think the historical perspective you are bringing is absolutely critical. We need to appreciate that there are younger and older churches, and to expect them to be at par in terms of their extension work is unfair. It's a point well taken. John's, a brilliant point also you make on the marginalization of African indigenous religions. And I would want to, I also saw someone here putting a comment on their concern also about the marginalization of African indigenous religions. And I do take note of that. It could be that in my presentation, I tended to emphasize more on the established religions, established as in having systems, visible systems. But I put it here that African traditional religions have retained indigenous knowledge systems that promote health and healing. Perhaps I didn't read that, but I do acknowledge that in a decolonial, post-colonial, Pan-African agenda, we do need to reiterate, underscore, and emphasize the key role that African indigenous religions have played in the past, are playing now, and will play in the future in terms of facilitating development in Africa. I thank you, and I've enjoyed our deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chitando, for your comprehensive answers to all these questions and for your insightful and exciting perspectives. Thank you very much. Great to have you in this panel.